this is Spruce and Studs, and welcome on in back to the channel, my family. So this video is kind of an interesting one. First of all, I wanted to shout out both Eric Mullins as well as Sable Bubble for actually giving me the idea of doing this video. I originally really did not intend on doing a video such as this one, but I thought, you know what, sure, why the hell not? Let's see what happens if I did. What am I getting at? So what I'm getting at, both of the people commented that, you know, what would happen if you just decided just to repaint these JoyToy action figures? And my initial response was, you guys have absolutely no idea the shame that I have inside of my basement, mainly because I have so many unfinished gray models that I needed to paint. I was like, well, I would just rather devote my time to paint these shameful gray models rather than to actually paint something that's already been painted, albeit not very well. But I decided, you know what, why the hell not? I think I'm going to try to do this. So this video is going to be a little bit interesting. Like, it's going to be a tutorial and kind of something like what worked for me and what didn't work for me when I repainted the JoyToy action figures. I already finished painting only one action figure. It's of my favorite one, obviously, which is the Blood Angels Blade Guard Veteran. And I would have to say that I have a few mixed results that came up from it. Overall, I'm pretty satisfied with how things turned up. One of the things I'm a little bit disappointed by is that I've never actually painted something on this large of a scale before. So there was a little bit of inexperience on my end of how I should be painting these things. When I was painting a large surface like the surface that you find on the Power Sword, kind of reminded me of painting, let's just say, something large, just like a tank. And when you're painting a tank by hand, it's actually very hard to do to get some kind of consistent application, you know. So one of the things that happened was, because I did not get consistent application, the Power Sword ended up looking a little bit chunky, which is a little bit disappointing to me. And with these types of large scale models, you need to actually thin your paints down and do multiple coats. And my impatience got the better of me. I did obviously thin my paints down, but it's nowhere near enough where I needed to actually get a consistent coat. So that was one of my disappointments, in which I'll highlight later on during the video, that occurred with me, because just with the scales and the size. And all I have to say is, even with the shading of it itself, it was a little bit uneven. There was one part when I was trying to shade the Storm Shield with regular Nun oil, which is wash. It came out very, very like weak looking. It didn't look right. So I had to go with a Black Templar's contrast in order to make that thing pop. So when you're, again, painting something on this large of a scale, there's a different application to it. Now, one of the things that you're probably just going to say when you notice me painting this thing is like, Spruce isn't bitching that JoyToy doesn't highlight their models. Why doesn't he highlight his models? So that is true. I didn't actually choose to highlight the Blade Guard Veteran, mainly because I kind of wanted a cohesive consistency when I'm displaying my JoyToy action figures in my cabinet. I think it would look really, really strange if I decided to just highlight that one Blade Guard Veteran and just leave every single one of my other JoyToy stuff completely unhighlighted. It would actually force me to paint all the action figures, in which I don't really want to. I'd rather devote my time and paint my gray models into something that comes to life. So that is the main reason why I decided not to highlight those areas. That being said, I did highlight quite a few other areas, in which I will get to in the video. Speaking of the video, I think I've bored you enough. Let's jump right in. Alright folks, the first thing that you need to do is remove the torso from the legs, and you just grip both sides and pull, and it'll usually come apart without any problems whatsoever. And the next thing I decided to do was actually hit the loincloth, or this cloth area, with Abaddon Black, and you can just paint it directly over the base paint. And I decided not to prime it or strip it. It works perfectly fine. And then what I decided to do was paint the pouches with Mournfang Brown, as you're seeing right here. And the natural color actually most matches Dryad Bark, but I kind of wanted to have a little bit more of a natural warm tone to all of my leather pouches, as I usually paint my Blood Angels. So that's exactly what I'm doing over here, just to give the belt a warm tone rather than the dark, cool tones of that dryad bark that you're seeing on the original belt. So as you can actually tell, the tones are very rich and very vibrant now, rather than having those dark tones that, again, I'm not too much of a fan of. So the next thing we're going to do is paint the metal areas with lead belcher, and as you can see here, it matches the holster pretty well. And again, I am choosing to paint over the original paint, as you can see over here. The lead belcher almost looks like a one-to-one match with the original paint. So I am actually now going over the parts that I felt like needed to be touched up. In fact, I think I actually ended up painting the whole entire thing. Again, I am painting this whole entire holster with Mornfane Brown, because it's warm, it's nice. And next I decided to shade with Agrax Earthshade, and it actually did make a big difference when you're looking at the action figure at the end, when you're looking at the finished action figure when everything is all nice and shaded. So I'm choosing right now to shade basically every single area where the brown is, so basically in between the leather pouches, as well as in between the metal parts on the holster. And next we move on to shading the silver areas with Nuln Oil, and this is a very common technique, obviously, if you paint miniatures, to actually deepen the color of the silver and then add more shade, more depth to it. So this is exactly what I did to paint around that area. Another thing that I wanted to point out here is I usually would use Agrax Earthshade in this area, but I actually used Nuln Oil because I found that using Agrax Earthshade didn't make that skull area pop out very well. So that's one of the things of my experience that I would want to impart to you guys. When you're painting things with this scale, sometimes the colors don't really come out the way that you would want. So the Agrax Earthshade did not pop out enough, so that's why I decided to do the Nuln Oil on that part. Now, as you see here, we have progressed on to doing some edge highlighting, and I'll let you know that edge highlighting is a heck of a lot easier on these larger surfaces, mainly because the surface is very large, and it's very easy to pick up those edges when you're doing edge highlighting. It's a lot easier than doing a miniature for damn sure. So after we've painted pretty much every single one of the surfaces on the leather areas, we're now moving over to painting the silver areas with Stormhost Silver. Again, it's a very common technique to highlight these areas. And what I decided to do next was to highlight the cloth area with an Eshin Gray, which is a very, very dark gray, almost very akin to the darkest gray that you can get before you start using Abaddon Black. The reason why I wanted to do this is because I didn't really want anything too drastic in this loincloth area. What I wanted was drastic was using Dawnstone to highlight the most raised areas on this part of the loincloth, and I think it actually came out pretty well. I had to do some touch-ups after this. As you can see here, the lines were pretty messed up, so I had to go in with some more Abaddon Black as well as Eshin Gray. And this is basically what the belt area looks like after I finished painting it with some shades and stuff. This is also where the pouches looked. It's way better than what the pouches looked before, where it looked like a child basically smeared a dry brush over the place. So the next thing I decided to do was paint the chest area with Abaddon Black. Again, I decided not to strip the paint. You can just paint the Citadel paint over the original paint, and I think it turned out pretty well with what happened over here. So I can see the close-up of all the highlighting that JoyToy did originally. It looks very sketchy, and I decided to do something about it. So the skull area on the knee looked kind of like a very bleached white, and I don't really like that look on a Blood Angel, so I typically paint that with an Ushabti bone, and that's exactly what I'm doing right here. I'm giving a little bit more color and life rather than that really weak and pallid look that originally came with the action figure. So with that, I then moved on to highlighting the chest area with Eshin Gray. Again, it is very, very easy to edge highlight this area because it's so raised and so pronounced compared to the miniatures that I'm so used to painting. So that's one of the things that I found that was completely different from painting a miniature, mainly because it's so easy to edge highlight. I wouldn't exactly say it was effortless, but it was definitely way easier. So in order to actually make the highest points pop, I decided to use, again, Dawnstone to make those areas, and as you can see here, it really, really looks better than what JoyToy did. And that's what happens when you own your own action figure. You can put in the time and the effort to really make it pop and really look good. Again, I understand that when JoyToy is doing this, there is a person that's painting it, that's mass manufacturing it, so I can understand why things look a little bit messy. The next thing I decided to do was to highlight the raised areas on the brass color with Stormhost Silver, and I really like how that turned out. By the way, that brass color part is more akin to, if you're going to be using a Citadel paint, it's going to be Hashnut Copper. It almost looks like it, but I think the Hashnut Copper looks a little bit too warm and rich compared to the brass color, or whatever you want to call it on the action figure. So moving on, as you can see here, I'm painting the blade of the power sword with a lead belcher at the base, and then I'm now painting it with Stormhost Silver. So this is a part where I struggled a lot, mainly because the Stormhost Silver did not have a lot of coverage. As you can see, the paint is looking very, very chunky here. So that's one of my experiences that really didn't turn out very well. You're really painting a large surface area with a color that does not seem to really want to like spread evenly, and it will show in the end, in which I'll show you in a second. So this is the storm shield without me painting it. Then I tried Nuln Oil, didn't work well. Then I used a Black Templar to fill in the recesses, which look a heck of a lot better now. And now you are looking at the end result of the power sword that I painted on the left hand side, as well as the power sword that JoyToy did on the right hand side. So as you see here, the one on the right hand side, which they did, is very, very dark around that area and very, very abruptly goes into the light silver area. That node over there is very, very, it's very faint and very weak looking. And I wanted something to really pop out because it's an electric node and it should be very, very vibrant. And then with the hilt or the handle part, the painting was really uneven too, so I needed to do something about that area. And what I decided to do was basically paint that area with a contrast paint, which was Flesh Tears Red. So this is what I did over here. As you can see, there's a very, very easy transition from the lead belcher all the way up to the Stormhost Silver on top. And I found that wet blending does a very good job here. The only thing that I really had some kind of lamenting was the consistency over here. So you can see that the painting is not fluid, it's very chunky, so I will have to make sure next time to do a heck of a lot better thinning down my paints. It's kind of irritating as I'm watching it right now, but I need to improve as a painter, especially when I really haven't painted these large scale figures at all. So flipping the blade around, this is the handiwork, and I think the inconsistency is actually a little bit worse on that side, but hey, it is what it is, and then you move on from there. So the next thing that I wanted to show you that I did was when I painted the handle area with the Flesh Tears Red. It's actually very dark and very vibrant, as well as, well, more uniform than the, I suppose, stock power sword. And you can see here that the Flesh Tears Red actually went inside of the groove, so again, it looks a lot more uniform than what it looked like before. But overall, I would have to say that the sword that I painted looks a lot better than from when it came stock out of the factory. Now moving on, you are seeing the Storm Shield. So the Storm Shield on the left hand side is the one that I painted myself, and the one that I'm holding right now on the right hand side is what came stock out of the JoyToy factory. As you can see here, as I highlighted before on my blade guard videos, that the color really looked off. There were painting issues all over the place. There was bleed. I just could not stand it. So here is the handiwork that I did displayed in front of you. So as you can see here, there's a lot more differentiation. The lines are actually very clean and very crisp. Again, this is what happens when you have your own action figure and you're devoting your own time to make these things as good as you can possibly be. So just to explain to you what I did, I actually painted Ushabti bone in the, I guess, skull colored areas, and then I went over the actual skull with lead belcher and then highlighted with Stormhost Silver. And then with the other copper areas, I actually painted over using the Hashnut Copper, as I told you before. So this is pretty much the end result. you actually can see that there was some issues where the color of the brass did not quite blend into the hashnut copper, but when you're looking at in the display case, you really can't tell the difference. But either way, this definitely looks way better than what it did before, as I'm holding the before pretty much on my right hand side. Okay, so now let's do a comparison of the before and after when I painted the belt area on the Blood Angels one versus the Black Templars one on the right hand side. I am pointing to you the terribleness of the highlighting of the Black Templar pouches compared to the pouches that I modified or repainted on the Blood Angels. As you can see, everything is warm, it's nice, it's crisp. There is no, I don't know, the dry brush just looks really terrible as I'm looking at it, and as I'm pointing that out to you, the Blood Angels pouches definitely look massively better than the Black Templars. So what I did with this Iron Halo part was I actually did a little bit of shading as well as painted the tips with Stormhost Silver to get a little bit of pop. I'm not sure if you can actually tell that the tips are painted, but I did that just to make sure that there's a little bit more depth as well as contrast on the action figures. So moving on, we're going to be comparing the scabbard area of the Black Templars versus the Blood Angels one. And again, you can see the Blood Angels one, as I was telling you, the skull on the left hand side looks a little bit more defined than the one on the right hand side because I decided to shade that with Nuln Oil. And over here I painted that with Scrag Brown to make it pop out. And then you can see the difference of the holsters of the two Space Marines, where the one on the left-hand side obviously is the one that I did. Then the one on the right-hand side is obviously what JoyToy did stock out of the factory. And you can see the one that's stock out of the factory looks pretty dull and doesn't really have that much vibrancy or life to it. It's probably because, again, there's no highlighting. There's some shading, but the color choice that they did was, again, using something akin to dryad bark. It's just very dull looking in my opinion, and that's why I decided to use that Mournfang Brown because of the richness and the vibrancy that's associated to it. In terms of the loincloth area, I think it looks way better than it did before, where the highlights was just one color and then the highlights were very broken and didn't really have any sort of consistency or a straight line to it. And so obviously you're seeing me what I did when I decided to highlight it with the Eshin Gray with the initial highlight and then with the Dawnstone for the secondary and more bright highlight. In this accessory, I decided to do some shading to give it a little bit more dimension and depth to actually match what's going on with the whole entire belt area. I didn't want to leave it flat. And then I also did shade the chain area as well as highlight the chain area. And this is the finished product for that skull, which I decided to use Ushabti bone. And then I typically would use some sort of Agrax Earth Shade or Reikland Flesh Shade for that area. But again, I needed for it to pop more, so I decided to use Nuln Oil. So moving on, we're going to take a look at my handiwork when I'm painting the chest area. I would again say that the chest area looks markedly better from what it came to stock, and because stock was just all over the place. So thank you folks for watching. I genuinely appreciate all the support that you've been giving in the past, and thank you Sable as well as Eric for giving me this idea to actually go and paint my action figures, as I did not think about doing this beforehand. So as usual, look to more preview videos as well as action figure reviews, and I'll see you all in the next one.